My own parents fired me to save money. Now I'm running the competitor that's buying them out for pennies on the dollar. I'm Ethan Clark, 38 years old. After 15 years building my family's business from nothing, they decided I was too expensive. Before I tell you how their panicked phone calls led to the most satisfying corporate takeover you'll ever hear, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. It's wild seeing how far these stories travel. It happened on a Tuesday. The conference room felt suffocating, like the air itself was holding its breath. My father James sat at the head of that big mahogany table, wearing his business face. The cold one. That's when I knew I was screwed. My mother Linda couldn't even look at me. She kept staring at some scratch on the table like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. And my younger brother John, he was practically glowing with this vicious satisfaction. He wasn't even trying to hide it. Clark Properties had been my entire world for 15 years. I built everything. The digital infrastructure across 50 complexes in 3 states. The tenant portals. The maintenance systems. The payment processing that handled millions every month. All of it came from my brain and my fingertips. I designed it to be bulletproof, the silent backbone of our family's success. Dad cleared his throat with this dry, rattling sound. "Ethan," he said, and his voice had this icy formality he'd never used with me before. "We've been working with a consulting firm, reviewing the company finances." He slid this glossy binder across the table. Operational Efficiency Analysis was printed on the cover in bold letters. I didn't open it. I already knew what it said. These cost cutters had been wandering our halls for weeks, asking surface-level questions and nodding like they understood the answers. They didn't understand shit. "It's simple overhead management," my mother said, her voice barely above a whisper. Still wouldn't look at me. "Your salary is a significant line item, Ethan. Very significant." Then John leaned forward, elbows on the table, that smirk spreading across his face like oil. "We can get 3 junior engineers for what we pay you," he said. His voice was dripping with this satisfaction he'd been saving up for years. "Nothing personal. Just smart business. Nothing personal." The words sucked all the oxygen out of the room. 15 years of 2 a.m. server crashes. Canceled dates. Vacations spent on the phone fixing systems only I understood. I built them an empire on rock-solid digital foundation, and they were talking about me like a broken appliance they could swap out. I didn't argue. What was the point? I just stared at my father, then my mother. Caught a flicker of guilt in Mom's eyes before she buried it. Dad's face stayed blank. They'd already decided. I stood up, pushed my chair in nice and neat, and nodded once. "I understand," I said, and the lie tasted like ash. Walking back to my office, I passed the main server room. Through the reinforced glass, I could see the familiar green lights of the system I'd built. On one of the monitors, a simple line appeared in the back-end diagnostic log. Data archiving protocol scheduled to execute in 60 days. A routine I'd programmed. A routine that needed my oversight. They had no idea they'd just started a countdown to their own destruction. I grabbed an empty box and started packing up 15 years of my life. It doesn't take as long as you'd think. A few photos, a coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Coder," some technical manuals I'd basically memorized. The whole time, memories kept hitting me. Not the good ones. The little moments of being taken for granted that I'd ignored for years. I wasn't just their son. I was their first real employee. I remember the beginning, working in the damp basement of their first tiny office building. While they were out making deals and shaking hands, I was down there with cinder block walls and lukewarm coffee, teaching myself to code because we couldn't afford to hire someone. I built our first server from scrap parts. Ran Ethernet cables across the ceiling with a staple gun. The system grew as the company grew. One property became 5, then 20, then 50 across Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. With each new acquisition, my system got more complex, more essential. It wasn't just convenient anymore. It was the company's central nervous system. It processed rent payments with ruthless efficiency. It dispatched maintenance crews using algorithms I'd written to minimize travel time and maximize tenant satisfaction. We had the highest occupancy rates in the region, and it was all because of what I'd built. I was the architect of their success. The problem was, I was the only one who really understood it. Not by choice, by budget. For at least 5 years, I'd been begging them to invest in a real IT department. I'd walk into Dad's big corner office with detailed plans and charts showing our exponential data growth. "Dad, we need at least 2 support techs," I'd say, pointing to graphs that showed our server load approaching critical levels. "And we need to start documenting the system architecture. If I get hit by a bus tomorrow, you'll be flying blind." Dad would lean back in that expensive leather chair my system had paid for multiple times over and give me this patronizing smile. "Son, money's tight right now. Every spare dollar has to go into acquiring that new property portfolio in Pittsburgh. Besides," he'd add with a hearty pat on my shoulder, "you handle it all so well on your own. Why pay for more people when we've got the best right here?" Mom's dismissal was different. Softer, but somehow worse. "Oh, Ethan, you worry so much," she'd say, waving her hand like she was shooing away a fly. "It's all just computers and wires. As long as the rent checks keep coming in, it's working fine. Don't overcomplicate things." I remember one Thanksgiving clearly. I was supposed to go to my girlfriend's family dinner. Big step for us. My phone exploded at 2 p.m., right as they were bringing the turkey out. A power surge at one of our main data centers had corrupted a critical database. I spent the next 6 hours on the phone and remotely logged in, painstakingly rebuilding the index from backup. I saved the company from potentially a week of downtime. When I called Dad late that night to tell him the crisis was over, he just said, "Good job, son. Knew you could handle it." Then he told me about the amazing turkey John had carved. Never asked what I'd missed. My girlfriend and I broke up a week later. David, our head of maintenance, was the only guy in the whole company who got it. David was a lifer with calloused hands and motor oil permanently stuck under his fingernails. He'd watched me grow from a skinny kid in the basement to the guy who ran the entire digital show. After one particularly brutal budget meeting, he found me in the server room, staring at the blinking lights. "Don't let them get to you, son," he said with that gravelly voice of his. "This whole operation, all 50 complexes, it runs on what's in your head. They don't have a clue. They think it's the buildings that make the money. It's not. It's this." He tapped the glass of a server rack with his thick finger. "It's you." His words were some comfort, but the frustration kept building, especially after John officially joined the team. He'd graduated with a business degree, and my parents immediately made him VP of Operations. Corner office, big expense account, and zero understanding of how the business actually worked. I remember him walking into my office once, seeing my whiteboards covered in complex diagrams, and saying, "So you just make the computers work? Seems pretty straightforward." He saw me as the nerdy older brother, the guy in the back room who served a necessary but expensive function. He resented my salary because he couldn't quantify my work with one of his simple spreadsheets. I was a problem to be solved, not an asset to be valued. Then came the consultants. They were introduced by Mr. Paul, an old family friend who played golf with Dad on Saturdays. "James, you've got to meet these guys," Paul had said at a 4th of July barbecue, his voice booming with fake enthusiasm. "They're absolute wizards. They'll find efficiencies in your operation you never even knew you had." The wizards from Cost Slashers Incorporated were 2 slick guys in suits that probably cost more than my first car. They spoke exclusively in buzzwords: synergy, optimization, right-sizing, value-added attrition. They made colorful charts and smooth PowerPoint presentations that said the same thing 100 different ways. To cut costs, what's the biggest, easiest, most value-added expense to eliminate? They pointed with a flourish to the highly compensated head of engineering who, in their expert opinion, could easily be replaced by a team of cheaper, younger, more flexible talent. They presented their findings to my parents in the main conference room. I was invited but not asked to speak. I basically had to sit there and listen while these 2 con artists, who probably couldn't tell the difference between a server and a microwave, explained how my 15 years of specialized knowledge was a liability. "You're paying for legacy knowledge," one of them said smoothly, glancing at my father. "In today's fast-moving tech landscape, you want nimble, hungry juniors. You can get 3 of them for this one salary. Think of the immediate ROI." My parents, who were already under financial pressure from a disastrous real estate investment they'd carefully hidden from me, saw the consultant's pitch as a miracle solution. It wasn't just about my salary. It was about finding an easy, validating answer to a complex problem they were too proud to admit they'd created. Firing me was easier than admitting they'd gambled and lost millions. Looking back, all the signs were there. Paul asking me oddly specific questions about our system security protocols at family gatherings. My parents awkwardly changing the subject whenever I brought up long-term planning. They weren't just being cheap. They were desperate. And John was just thrilled to finally be the unchallenged prince with the court wizard out of the way. I sealed the cardboard box with a long, loud strip of packing tape. As I carried it out of my office for the last time, I saw David in the hallway. He just looked at me, his eyes full of this sad, weary understanding. He shook his head slowly. "They just made the biggest mistake of their lives, son," he said quietly. At the time, I thought he was just being a loyal friend. I had no idea how prophetic those words would turn out to be. I walked out into the bright afternoon sun, leaving the blinking green lights and my entire family behind. I felt profound sadness, but something else was bubbling up underneath it. Cold, unshakable determination. They'd made a business decision. Now it was time for me to make mine. That night, after setting the box from my old life in the corner of my quiet apartment, I opened my laptop. There was an unread email in my inbox. The subject line was simple and professional. Interview invitation, Chief Systems Architect. The sender was Ridgeview Management, our biggest, sharpest, most successful competitor. The first 2 months after leaving Clark Properties were this weird, surreal period of quiet. For the first time in 15 years, my phone wasn't a ticking time bomb of emergency calls. I could eat dinner without worrying about database corruption. I slept through the night. Every night. I had 3 rounds of intensive interviews with Ridgeview Management. Their CEO, Victoria Cross, this sharp, no-nonsense woman, didn't just ask about my qualifications. She grilled me about my system design philosophy, scalability, how to build resilient, future-proof platforms. It was a conversation I'd wanted to have with my own father for years. One about building instead of just maintaining. Then, exactly 59 days after being fired, David called me. Not on my old work phone, obviously, but on my personal cell that only a few people had. "Ethan, it's David," he said, his voice tight with stress I knew all too well. "Sounds like something's broken. We've got a problem. A big one. What's going on, David?" I said, my heart starting to beat with that familiar, unwanted rhythm. "The system's acting up bad. Maintenance requests are disappearing into thin air. It's not just a glitch. It's like they were never even submitted." John's new hotshot tech guy, Chad, kept telling everyone it was a minor caching issue. I knew Chad from a brief, uncomfortable introduction before I left. Young, confident, resume full of trendy buzzwords, and a smirk that was a cheap imitation of John's. "It's Mrs. Gable in 12B, David said, his voice dropping. "She's 80 years old, lives alone. Her ceiling's about to collapse from a pipe leak. She's been calling for 3 days. Chad just keeps telling her to submit a ticket online, but the portal's broken. She's been calling my personal cell, crying. I don't know what to do." The image of this poor elderly woman terrified in her own home made my blood run cold. This wasn't about servers or code anymore. This was about people. "It's not a caching issue, is it, David?" I asked gently. There was a long pause. "No, son. It's not. Feels different. Feels like the whole thing's starting to rot from the inside out." I knew what it was. Tomorrow was day 60. The data archiving protocol. I'd built this powerful script that ran quarterly, a housekeeping routine for moving old, inactive records to deep storage. It kept the active database lean and fast, but it was never meant to be fully automated. It required manual oversight to distinguish between truly old data, like a tenant who moved out 3 years ago, and recently active data that just hadn't been updated in a few weeks. It was a failsafe, a human check in the system to prevent exactly what was about to happen. Without my supervision, the script would run blind. It would flag a 3-month-old lease agreement as inactive and archive it, making it inaccessible to the front-end systems. It would see a recent payment record and do the same. It wouldn't just be a glitch. It would be systematic, cascading data destruction. I explained it to David in the simplest terms I could. He let out a long, creative string of curses under his breath. "I'll try to warn them," he said, but we both knew it was pointless. John would never listen to an old maintenance guy over his new IT genius. The next day, the storm hit full force. My phone started ringing around 9 a.m. The first call was from John. His voice was irritated, not alarmed. "Hey, Ethan, that maintenance thing is a little worse than we thought. Chad's having some trouble tracking it down. What's the admin password for the root database?" It was a fundamentally reckless question, like asking for launch codes to a nuclear silo. Giving him that password would be corporate suicide. "I'm not an employee anymore, John," I said calmly, my voice steady. "I can't give you that information. It would be a massive security breach. Don't be like that. We're family. Just help us out. You defined the terms of our relationship, John. It's business. And I'm not in business with you anymore," I replied. Then I hung up. An hour later, my mother called. Her voice was full of artificial sweetness. "Ethan, honey, your brother is really struggling. He's so stressed out. Can't you just come in for a little bit? Just to point him in the right direction." "Mom, I don't work there anymore. It wouldn't be appropriate. Don't be so difficult, Ethan. This is your family's legacy on the line." "You told me it was just business, Mom," I answered, my tone sharper than I intended. "A smart business decision." I ended the call before she could respond. By mid-afternoon, real panic had set in. My father called, his voice a mixture of rage and terror. "Ethan, the payment processing system is completely down. It's rejecting all incoming rent payments. It's the first of the month. We have millions of dollars in receivables that have just vanished. Do you know what kind of penalties we're facing from the banks?" "I have an idea," I said. The archiving protocol had probably flagged active tenant payment profiles as inactive and locked them down one by one. "You have to fix this," he said, his voice cracking with desperation. "This is a disaster of your making." "My making," I said, this eerie calm washing over me. I seem to remember presenting budgets for a support team and documentation project 5 years running. "Who was it that called that unnecessary overhead? I'll pay you $200 an hour. Whatever you want. Just come down here." This was the moment I'd both dreaded and in some dark, bitter corner of my heart expected. My mind flashed back to that cold conference room. John's sneer. My mother's averted gaze. My father's cold dismissal. Years of being undervalued. My warnings systematically ignored. A lifetime of it. Then my brain did something unexpected. It took me back to a sunny afternoon when I was 10 and John was 6. He'd fallen off his bike, scraped his knee bad. Blood mixed with dirt. He was screaming, and I was the one who picked him up, dusted him off, carried him halfway home on my back. A pang of family loyalty, a ghost of brotherly love, twisted in my stomach. For a brief moment, I almost caved. Then my phone buzzed with an email notification. I glanced at my laptop screen. The sender was Victoria Cross. Subject line: formal offer, Chief Systems Architect, Ridgeview Management. The memory of my crying little brother faded, replaced by crystal-clear image of John's smug face in that boardroom. The internal struggle ended. My resolve hardened into something as strong and unbreakable as forged steel. "Dad," I said into the phone, my voice steady and clear as a bell. "You made a business decision. I've made one too." Before he could respond, I hung up. I opened the email from Ridgeview. My salary was 30% higher than what my father had been paying me. It included a substantial signing bonus and stock options in a growing company. But it was more than money. It was the title. It was respect. It was the opportunity to build something amazing without having to beg for the tools to do it. The phone rang again. It was John. His voice was wild, hysterical. $500 an hour, Ethan. 500. Just name your price. We'll give you a stake in the company. Please. I let it go to voicemail. I typed a one-word response to Victoria Cross. Accepted. Then I turned off the phone. For the first time in my adult life, silence felt peaceful. Starting at Ridgeview Management felt like walking out of a black-and-white movie into brilliant Technicolor. The workspace was sleek and modern, designed for collaboration. Floor-to-ceiling windows. This calm, focused energy. On my first day, Victoria Cross personally walked me to my new office. Corner office with a stunning view of the downtown skyline. "This is your space, Ethan," she said, her tone direct and respectful. "Your team is 4 senior engineers, all top tier. Your first-year budget is in the welcome packet. We hired you because you're one of the best. We trust you to build the most robust, scalable, secure property management platform in the industry. My door is always open. Don't hesitate to ask for what you need. This is what I need." The words were simple, but they felt revolutionary. For 15 years, my professional life had been defined by what I couldn't have. Here, I was being asked what I needed to succeed. It was disorienting in the best possible way. My new team was incredible. Real professionals who were genuinely excited to work with me. When I presented my initial architectural plans on a huge whiteboard, they saw possibilities instead of obstacles. They asked sharp, insightful questions. They challenged my assumptions in productive ways. We spent an entire afternoon debating the merits of two different database technologies. We were collaborating to build something great together. It was everything I'd ever wanted in a professional environment. Linda, one of my engineers, found a way to optimize a search query I'd written, shaving half a second off response time. Instead of being defensive, I was thrilled. "That's brilliant," I told her. "Implement it." The look of surprise and appreciation on her face told me everything I needed to know about the culture Victoria had built here. Meanwhile, the storm at Clark Properties escalated into a Category 5 hurricane. David kept me updated through occasional, discreet text messages, dispatches from a war zone. They tried to restore from a backup server. One text read, "It was a week old. They lost the last 7 days of maintenance logs and payment data. Chad's blaming a corrupted server issue. John hired 2 more junior guys from an online freelance platform." Another said a week later, "They're in 2 different countries. It's like watching 3 kids try to solve a Rubik's Cube by hitting it with hammers over a bad video call." The chaos wasn't just internal anymore. Tenants were furious. Negative reviews were popping up on Google and Yelp like poisonous mushrooms. Occupancy rates, once my family's proudest metric, were starting to plummet. About a month into my new job, Victoria called me into her office. Same office where she'd hired me, but the dynamic was different. I wasn't a candidate anymore. I was part of her inner circle. "Ethan," she began, motioning for me to sit down. "You've been here a few weeks now. You're getting the lay of the land. I've got an assignment that requires your unique perspective." She slid a folder across her polished desk. "I want a comprehensive competitive analysis of the top firms in our region. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. I'm particularly interested in your expert and objective assessment of Clark Properties. I know the history, but I want your professional evaluation of their current operational vulnerabilities from a purely technical standpoint." My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't a casual request. This was a strategic move. Corporate chess. I spent the next week working late into the night. Not out of obligation, but out of fierce professional pride. I was objective. I didn't write about family betrayal or hurt feelings. I prepared a cold, rigorous technical analysis of a company in free fall. I documented the bespoke, undocumented, vulnerable nature of the IT systems. I identified the single point of failure: complete dependence on one person's institutional knowledge. I detailed the cascading effects of letting the data archiving protocol run unsupervised: catastrophic data loss, major legal and compliance issues, complete and permanent breakdown in tenant confidence. My assessment was brutal. Without a top-to-bottom system rebuilt by an expert team, which would take months and cost millions, the company's core operational integrity was irreparably compromised. I didn't have to guess. I knew. I'd built the house, so I knew where all the load-bearing walls were, and I knew they were about to collapse. I submitted the 20-page report to Victoria. She read it in complete silence, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she carefully placed it on her desk and looked up at me. "This is devastatingly thorough," she said with a gleam in her eyes I couldn't quite interpret. "Thank you, Ethan. This is exactly what I needed." A few days later, I got one final text from David. It was a photo of a letter on thick letterhead from Vanguard Holdings, our former biggest client. The text below was brief and brutal. "It's official. Vanguard just terminated their contract. That's 20% of our most profitable complexes. Gone. This is the killing blow, Ethan. The company's in a death spiral with no way out." I stared at the image, then out the window of my new office at the bustling city below. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel sorry. I felt a profound sense of inevitability, like I was watching a law of physics in action. Actions have consequences. It wasn't personal anymore. It was just business. My old family company was collapsing exactly as I'd predicted for years. David's call about Vanguard Holdings canceling their contract was the final tremor before the earthquake. I knew what losing their biggest client meant. It wasn't just a financial blow. It was a public vote of no confidence that would ripple through the entire regional real estate industry. Clark Properties wasn't just struggling anymore. It was openly sinking, and the sharks were starting to circle. I spent the rest of that day in this strange, focused detachment. I led a design meeting with my Ridgeview team, sketching out the architecture for our new cutting-edge tenant portal. We were building something clean, modern, documented, robust. We were building something the right way. The contrast between my present and past was stark. That evening, as I pulled into my driveway, my headlights cut through the twilight and landed on a familiar figure slumped on my front steps. It was John. He looked like a ghost of his former self. His usually perfect hair was a mess. His expensive suit was wrinkled and stained. The usual sneer was gone, replaced by raw, hollow-eyed desperation that was painful to see. I turned off the engine and got out of my car, my keys jingling in the sudden quiet. I walked carefully toward him. He stood up as I approached, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, shoulders bowed in defeat. "Ethan," he said, his voice hoarse and broken. We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about, John," I said flatly, emotionless. I kept my hand on the car door. "Please," he begged, and the word came out like it was being torn from a wounded animal. "Just hear me out. Vanguard's gone. The bank's calling our loans. We're going to lose everything. The company's going under." "I see," I replied. "No, you don't see," he shot back, a flash of his old arrogance surfacing before being quickly smothered by a wave of despair. "It's complete chaos. The system, it's like a black box. Chad and his guys quit this morning. They took their final paychecks and just walked out. They said the whole system was impossibly complex and unsalvageable. They said only a ghost could have built it. I'm not a ghost, John. I'm the guy you told to pack his things because I was too expensive." The words hung in the cold night air between us. He flinched like I'd physically struck him. For the first time in my life, I saw genuine shame in my brother's eyes. "I know. Okay, I know. I was an idiot. I was always jealous of you. I hated that Dad depended on you for the important stuff. I was a stupid, arrogant fool. Dad and Mom, they were idiots too. We were all idiots. But this is our family's legacy, Ethan. Dad built this company from nothing." "No, John," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, cutting through his rambling. "Dad signed the papers. I built the engine that made it run for 15 years. And you all decided to throw out the mechanic and let the valet try to fix it. How did that work out for you?" He had no answer for that. He just stared at me, his face pale and exhausted under the yellow glare of the porch light. "The insurance company's threatening to drop us because our maintenance records are missing," he said, the words rushing out. "The bank's threatening to freeze our assets. It's not just one thing, Ethan. It's everything. It's all falling apart at once." He took a step forward. "Just help us," he begged, his voice breaking. "I'm begging you. Name your price. Any price. $1 million. A stake in the company. Whatever you want. Just come back and fix it. Please. You're the only person in the world who can." I looked at my brother, the golden child who'd had everything handed to him on a silver platter, who was now so low he was standing on my doorstep, crying for help. A small, exhausted 10-year-old part of me felt pity. But it was buried under 15 years of being treated like a utility. It was overshadowed by the memory of that smug smirk in that cold conference room. I took a deep breath, and the air in my lungs felt clean and free. "You said you could run the company without me, John. You said it was just business. Well, this is the result of your business decision. Now you get to live with it." I walked to my front door and unlocked it. The click of the latch echoed the finality of my words. I went inside and closed the solid oak door. I didn't watch him leave. I walked into my kitchen, leaned against the counter, my heart pounding and my hands shaking slightly. It was over. That was the final word. Or so I thought. The next morning, I was in a strategy meeting at Ridgeview when my phone, face down on the table, vibrated. A text from David. My hands were still a little shaky when I picked it up. It wasn't a message. It was a photo. A photo of a crisp white envelope on the reception desk at Clark Properties. The return address was from a prestigious downtown law firm I recognized for handling major corporate deals. But it was the name printed discreetly under the law firm's logo that made the air rush out of my lungs. Ridgeview Management. My own company. I mumbled an excuse and stepped out of the meeting, my mind racing. I walked to the end of the hallway to the window overlooking the city and called David. He picked up on the first ring. "What is that, David?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "A courier just dropped it off," he said, his voice full of amazement and disbelief. "It's addressed to your father, your mother, and John. I saw the letterhead, Ethan. What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," I said, and that was the truth. I had no idea what was happening. I hung up and walked in something like a daze straight to Victoria Cross's office. Her door was open. She saw my expression and waved me in with a slight nod. "You've heard, I take it," she said quietly, her fingers steepled on her desk. "Heard what, Victoria? What's going on?" "That letter." She gave a small, satisfied smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It was the smile of a chess grandmaster who had just put her opponent in checkmate. "Your competitive analysis was very persuasive, Ethan. It highlighted a unique and time-sensitive opportunity. A company with valuable portfolio of properties, crippled by catastrophic but eminently fixable operational failure. In the world of mergers and acquisitions, that's what we call a perfect target." She leaned forward. "The board approved the move last night. We made a formal, non-negotiable offer this morning. A low one, I might add, given their current state of extreme distress. They'll have no choice but to accept. It's either this or Chapter 7 bankruptcy." It took me a moment to grasp the vast, breathtaking scope of what she was saying. Ridgeview was buying Clark Properties. My new employer was buying my old one. "And there's one more thing," she said, pulling a folder from her desk. It was a copy of the formal offer letter, a key non-negotiable condition of this acquisition. She turned the page around and pointed to a specific clause. Section 4, subsection B. My eyes landed on my name. "As a condition of this transaction, Mr. Ethan Clark, Ridgeview Management's Chief Systems Architect, will be appointed to oversee the comprehensive technical audit and subsequent system integration of all Clark Properties assets." I stared at the words, then back at Victoria. The universe tilted on its axis before snapping back into sharp, vivid focus. I wasn't just the guy who'd refused to help. I wasn't just the guy who'd been vindicated. I was now in charge. My family's desperate calls had finally stopped because they would now have to make an appointment to speak with me. The acquisition announcement detonated inside Clark Properties' hollowed-out shell. David told me later that when my father opened the lawyer's letter, he read it 3 times, his face turning a gray color David had never seen before. My mother just sat down in the nearest chair, her hands trembling, and stared into the middle distance. And John just stood there, stunned, until the full reality of the situation came crashing down on him like a physical blow. Their business, their family legacy, was being sold for pennies on the dollar to their main competitor. And I was the face and engine behind that takeover. A week later, I walked back through the glass doors of the Clark Properties building for the first time since being abruptly fired. But I wasn't walking in as a humiliated son. I walked in as a senior executive from the new parent company, flanked by 2 members of Ridgeview's efficient, professional transition team. As we entered, the few remaining employees looked up from their desks, their eyes wide with a powerful mixture of fear and fascination. My parents and John stood in the doorway of my father's old office, waiting for me. They looked smaller, diminished by the weight of their failure. "Ethan," my father began, his voice strained and uncertain. "Mr. Clark," I corrected him, my tone polite but firm, establishing an immediate and unbridgeable distance. "Perhaps we should all meet in the conference room to discuss the transition plan." The shift in address, that chill professional title, hit them harder than any angry words could have. It drew a line in the sand as sharp as a razor blade. Today, in this building, I was neither their son nor their brother. I was their new reality. We sat in the same conference room where I'd been abruptly fired. The irony was so thick I could practically taste it. This time, I sat at the head of the table where my father had always sat. I presented the transition plan with calm, professional precision, my voice never wavering. I talked about asset evaluation, operational audits, personnel reviews. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even make eye contact longer than professionally required. My cool, detached professionalism was both armor and weapon. They understood business speak, and it was now being used to clearly inform them that they had lost complete control. "The first order of business," I said, glancing at a whiteboard just above Dad's head, "is a complete top-to-bottom overhaul of the IT infrastructure. My team will begin full diagnostics tomorrow morning. John, you'll need to provide them with all existing administrative credentials and any documentation." "There is no documentation," John said, his eyes fixed on the table. "I'm aware," I replied, my voice flat as a dial tone. "Then you'll just provide the credentials. My team will create the documentation. We do things properly at Ridgeview." After the meeting, as I was packing my leather briefcase, my mother approached me. Her eyes were full of unshed tears. "Ethan, can we please just talk for 5 minutes?" As a family, part of me felt a twinge of old guilt. But I knew that giving in even slightly would erode the wall I'd fought so hard to build. I needed to see this through. "Mom," I said, my voice softening slightly. A deliberate amount of grace. "Right now, my absolute priority is stabilizing this company to protect Ridgeview's investment. Any conversations about non-business matters are best saved for another time and place." I turned to face her, my voice becoming more official. "We can schedule a follow-up through my assistant if you have any operational questions." She recoiled like I'd slapped her. The boundary was established. It was absolute. She understood. The weeks that followed were this bizarre exercise in undoing my own life's work. My smart, efficient Ridgeview team marveled at the complexity and ingenuity of what I'd built entirely on my own. They shook their heads in bewilderment at the complete lack of support and documentation. "It's like one guy built an entire skyscraper," one of them told me. "And then they fired the architect and were surprised when the elevator stopped working." One of the strangest moments came when I required all surviving Clark employees, including my brother, to complete a multi-day training course on new Ridgeview IT processes and ethics policies. Obviously, I didn't conduct the training myself. I delegated it to a bright, capable junior engineer on my team, a woman named Maya who was half John's age and twice as competent. I walked past the training room at one point and looked through the glass partition. I saw John sitting at a computer terminal, his shoulders slumped as Maya patiently explained the new help desk ticketing system. He looked up, and our eyes met for a brief moment through the glass. I saw humiliation. I saw resentment. And for the first time in my life, I saw a flicker of what looked like genuine, grudging respect. I gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod and kept walking. The message was clear. This is how a professional organization operates. This is what you threw away. 6 months passed. Clark Properties' integration into the Ridgeview portfolio wasn't just successful. It became a case study for the company. Under my guidance, we didn't just repair the old dysfunctional system. We tore it down to the studs and rebuilt from scratch. It was a work of art. Secure, scalable, cloud-based, and so thoroughly documented that any qualified developer could walk in and understand it. Tenant satisfaction, which had hit rock bottom, skyrocketed. The properties that had been bleeding money became Ridgeview's most profitable assets. My reputation within the company was cemented. I wasn't just the guy who'd survived a brutal family betrayal. I was the guy who could turn a sinking ship into a flagship. But my relationship with my family remained professional and distant. I saw them during quarterly review meetings. I sent polite, work-related emails. The personal connection I'd once treasured above all else felt severed, possibly permanently. Then, unexpectedly, my father called my personal cell and asked me to join him for dinner. Just the two of us. I hesitated. My first instinct was to decline, to maintain the distance. But something in his voice, a deep exhaustion I'd never heard before, made me agree. We met at a quiet old-school steakhouse. Neutral territory filled with the soft murmur of other people's conversations. For a long time, we ate in awkward silence. Finally, he set down his knife and fork, placed precisely on his plate. He looked at me with tired, hooded eyes. "I was wrong, Ethan," he said, the words coming out slow and heavy, like each one was a terrible weight he had to bear. "Your mother and we were wrong. Terribly, fundamentally wrong." I didn't say anything. I just listened, my expression neutral. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. "It wasn't just about the money," he continued, his gaze dropping to the white tablecloth. "It was pride. My pride. We'd made a bad investment. Speculative land deal down in Florida. It went south. We were in deeper than we ever let on to anyone, especially you. We were facing possible Chapter 11 bankruptcy." He took a shaky breath, sipped some water. "And then Paul, our friend, your godfather, he was in my ear constantly. He kept telling me how bloated our operational costs were, how we were living in the past. He was the one who introduced us to those consultants. He pushed it, Ethan. He said it was the only smart move, the only way to free up capital and save ourselves. He made it sound so simple, so logical. A lifeline." He looked up, and for the first time I saw a broken man instead of a failing businessman. We were scared, and we were ashamed. It was easier to believe a stranger in a suit who told us what we wanted to hear than to admit to our own son that we'd failed, that we'd put the family's legacy at risk. He paused, his voice cracking. He played on my deepest fear that I wouldn't have anything to leave John. James, he'd say, what will John inherit if this all goes wrong? You're doing this for him. He met my eyes. We sacrificed you to save our own pride. This was the missing piece of the puzzle. The one that gave the whole horrible scenario a twisted kind of sense. It didn't excuse what they did. Far from it. But it did reframe it. They weren't just cruel. They were desperate, weak, and expertly manipulated. Paul, I asked quietly, why would he do that to you? He was your best friend. My father gave a bitter, humorless laugh that ended in a cough. Best friend? Yeah. We found out a month after the Ridgeview acquisition was announced. His lawyer accidentally sent an email to our old accountant. Paul had a shell company set up, ready to make a lowball offer. He was planning to buy us out for 10 cents on the dollar the moment the bank called our loans. He wasn't trying to help us save the company. He was trying to push it off a cliff so he could pick through the wreckage. He shook his head slowly, the weight of the double betrayal heavy on him. We were so busy betraying you, we never saw the real snake in the grass. We sat in silence for another long moment. He'd confessed. He'd laid the family's shame on the table between us. It wasn't an apology asking for forgiveness. It was a statement of truth. A final, heartbreaking accounting of what really happened. Thank you for telling me, I finally said. That was all I could offer. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't absolution. But it was acknowledgement. It was a weak, tentative beginning. The next day, while I was finishing up at work, I got an email. It came from John's personal account. No subject line. I clicked it open, half expecting another desperate plea or bitter accusation. The body of the email contained just 3 words. You were right. It wasn't an apology. It was a concession, a surrender, complete and total acknowledgement of a truth he'd spent his entire life rejecting. I stared at those 3 words on the screen for a long time. Then, with a quiet click, I dragged my cursor to the little trash can icon. I deleted the email. I didn't need his concession anymore. My vindication didn't come from his words, my father's confession, the money, or the corner office. It came from the work. It always had. Today, I'm sitting in my old office. Of course, it's been renovated. The walls are a soothing professional gray. The furniture is modern and clean. The old wheezing server that used to hum in the closet has been replaced with a silent, powerful blade server connected to the Ridgeview cloud. This is my office, but it's also not. It represents how much has changed, both for the company and for me. From my window, I can see the city spread out in a vibrant panorama of possibilities. I'm not the guy in the back room keeping the lights on anymore. I'm an architect of the future for a company that values long-term investment over short-term cuts, that invests in resilience instead of taking shortcuts. My family, our relationship is rebuilding. It's a slow, careful process, like gluing together a shattered vase. It'll never be what it was before. And maybe that's okay. It'll be something new, something more honest. There are awkward holiday dinners with long silences and unspoken truths. My father is quieter now, more thoughtful. My mother tries too hard to be kind, her gestures heavy with regret she can't quite voice. John works at a junior project management position at another company in another state. I hear he's doing well. He's learning from the ground up, like I did. Maybe someday we'll be brothers again. Maybe not. When I look back on what happened, I don't feel triumphant. The anger and bitterness have mostly faded, replaced by something quieter. What I feel is profound, unshakable clarity. My family made a terrible mistake. They thought my value was a number that could be reduced on a spreadsheet. They thought they could replace 15 years of work, expertise, and institutional knowledge with something cheaper and easier. They fired their son, but they couldn't fire the consequences. They learned the hard way that the most expensive asset a company can lose isn't money. It's irreplaceable knowledge. It's trust. In the end, this was never meant to be a revenge story. It was a story about respect. Respect for the work. Respect for experience. And finally, respect for yourself, especially when those who are supposed to love you most fail to do so. You have to be the one to define your own worth. Build your own value. And stand by it, even when it means standing alone. You have to be willing to architect your own future, brick by brick, line by line of code. Because only a foundation built on real, undeniable value can never be shaken. So let me ask you this. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and self-respect? How did you handle it? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story hit home, give it a thumbs up and subscribe. These family business stories get messy, and I've got more where this came from.